everyone for coming tonight to the Shares of SF Trust and Safety in Marketplaces. I'm really excited to have this conversation. It actually started as a conversation with Juan maybe about 6 months ago, and then I met the folks at GoodHire and Inflection, and they also were wanting to have this conversation. And it's a very emergent conversation around trust, safety, reputation, background checks. What do we need to do to feel and actually be safe online? So my name is Chelsea Rustrom, and I am the founder of the Shares of SF, which is an educational and social series on the sharing economy. And I'm also the co-author of It's a Shareable Life. So I want to say a big shout out and a very special thanks to GoodHire and Trady for making this happen tonight. They both sponsored this event and the food and everything else that you see here this evening, and also to General Assembly for having us here tonight. So let's give a round of applause for that. So I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is I found out earlier today that Airbnb is not going to be able to be here today. They let me know their PR team just said they couldn't make it and they couldn't find a replacement. So I'm not quite sure why that happened, but that's the reality. So the good news is we have 4 awesome panelists here, including, well, we'll get to that. So we have Juan Cartagena, the CEO of Trady. His last name is really hard to say, so I had to practice it like 7 times. Don Foltz, who's the Director of Safety at Couchsurfing. Max Westman, the VP of GoodHire, and Laura Gelman, an attorney and founder of Blurry Edge Strategies. So first off, I'm going to have each company talk about kind of what they do in relation to trust and safety and introduce themselves, because I think they'll be better at talking about what they do than, say, me trying to do that for them. So let's start with you, Juan. Pass that one down, yeah.
Hello, everyone. So I'm the founder of Trady. What Trady does is we're trying to create a standard for reputation. So we aggregate different social media sources, marketplaces, sources, different sources of identity to measure people's reputation in a way that makes sense. So what I mean with making sense is that from a place like Airbnb, we extract semantic analysis and we try to search for things like wonderful guest or amazing guest, or we actually found out when you say nice guest is actually in the lowest 10 percentile of quality guests, so that kind of thing. And from other sources like LinkedIn, we try to search for consistency. So if you said that you work for McKinsey, we try to find whether you have other friends in McKinsey. And if you said that you studied in Harvard, do we find for friends in Harvard? And if you don't, then it gives you kind of shows that you have less consistency. And what we're trying to create with this profile is that you can use it and leverage it elsewhere. So today you have all your reputation ring-fenced in different networks and isolated. So your Airbnb reputation is only within Airbnb, your eBay reputation is only within eBay. What would happen if you could use that reputation elsewhere and prove that you are a trusted member of any community the day that you sign up, not only after you do 10 or 20 transactions in that network? So that's pretty much what we do.
Perfect, yeah, we'll get deeper into it later on.
Okay, hi, I'm Don Foltz. I manage trust and safety at Couchsurfing. Been there 3 weeks now. I've spent the prior 15 years at eBay managing trust and safety, seller performance, reputation, anti-counterfeits. 15 years, covered a lot of turf. At Couchsurfing, Couchsurfing is essentially a site that allows travelers to travel around the world and meet up with people and locals that can either just meet up for a drink or take them out on the town and show them the sights, or let them crash on their couch for a few days, and hence the name. It allows travelers or hosts to bring people in, get to become part of the community, show people the sights, and create events around your community. So we could create an event here in San Francisco, and couch surfers could go and hang out and talk about whatever the event need be. For safety there, do we want to get into that now? Or?
We can save that for a little later.
All right, so that's what we do.
Hi there, Max Westman. I run product and operations for GoodHire. And we're very involved in the sharing economy. We help provide a layer of trust for the service providers in the sharing economy by providing background checks for contractors, employers, volunteers, whatever have in accordance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So, we're very much on top of the latest legislation and all the good stuff around how we keep those people who participate in the sharing economy safe. And Good Hire, we're a part of a larger company, Inflection, and Inflection has been in the broader public record space for many years. And so trust and safety as a general topic is something that's very important to us, and we're constantly thinking about ways in which we can advance that conversation.
Hi, so I'm Lauren Gelman, and I run a law practice here in the Bay Area that works with companies that have interesting new privacy or other policy issues and tries to help them navigate the rules of the road for the space. Inflection is one of my clients, and I've been working with them, and they invited me to join you here. But I'm, talking on behalf of my own experience, and I work with a variety of clients: Fitbit, Reddit, Euclid, a whole seesaw, like companies that are dealing either with sensitive data or interesting policy issues, and really want to get ahead of the curve in thinking through those issues.
Sounds like we have some deep domain knowledge here going back for a while. Thanks, everybody. So I just want to start with a wide open question for all of the panelists, which is, what do you think users need to feel and actually be safe? Anybody can answer that one. You can pop it around if you want.
I guess I'll start. What do they need to feel safe?
I think it's two different questions, right? Like feeling safe and actually being safe might be different, right? Like, what do I need to book that couch surfing stay or that Airbnb stay? And what do I actually need to be safe in that while I'm staying?
Totally, yeah. I think, from the perspective of, let's say you're hailing an Uber, you want to feel like the person who is driving that car is safe. And safe is, a relative term based on kind of the merits of that particular marketplace. But in the case of an Uber, you want to make sure that they have not had a DUI and that they are going to act responsibly because they believe that the platform that they're working for will regulate that. And so I think as a consumer of services like that, I personally feel safe when I get into a car and I know that person has been vetted to a degree, and so I think it's about not only the actual process of running someone's background check and going through all of the rigmarole there, but making it clear to anyone who participates in that service that this service values safety and goes through these various steps to ensure it for their customers.
What do you think those steps are?
Well, again, from my perspective, it's running a background check.
Okay.
I have a somewhat skewed perspective, but
sure. Maybe we can pass it around.
Yeah, so I actually think you covered what it takes to feel safe pretty well. I'd add a little in that I think when you talk about the investment in safety, having the tools on your site to make the folks feel like you're invested into it. So keeping your messaging on your site so they know they've got the right tools to talk to somebody, having a reputation system of some kind so that they know if a bad experience occurred, that person who had the bad experience had the opportunity to relay that. Having those makes you feel safe. I think being safe is a little different. It's less trust in the tools and less trust in the company, and more the actual actions of the company and whether or not you're flagging the right accounts on the back end and you've got the right risk processes in place, and then making sure the members are actually educated well enough to take care of any issues that arise out in the real world, because as much as we can do on a platform, it's unpredictable out there. And so you've got to understand what service you're using and what the risks are, how to handle it if that comes up.
Okay. I know for me, when I read reviews, say on Airbnb or Couchsurfing or Get Around or any of these services, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, like what's the context and what did people say about this person, and possibly if there's a social layer, do I have friends in common, and things of that nature. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit, Juan.
Yeah, so obviously we have done a lot of research, and we have understood that each network is, or each transaction is tremendously contextual. So, for example, you could not expect that on Uber you have to choose the Uber driver. You just are given an Uber driver by default, and you can cancel if you don't like him or her. But you get that person given to you. On Airbnb, you choose the person, or on TaskRabbit, you used to choose the person. Now they give you a choice of 3 people, and you choose. So all those transactions are actually changing more towards on demand, and on demand is going to mean you choose less. The algorithm chooses more for you, and you are kind of trusting the platform that the people that are sending to you are good enough. And let me give you an example that I had today. Today I ordered some food on Instacart. I didn't choose the person to come to my home. I just hope that Instacart had a good enough vetting of the person to bring me something. So I think that we are putting a lot more trust in the platform to do the right things, and you do less work. I think that there are a few transactions where you still have to put a lot of work, and obviously they are probably the less, let's say the least hands-on networks like Craigslist. All the work is on you, right? But we still use Craigslist. I mean, you would have expected that by now we would use it less, but we still use it, and we use it for even the most important transactions in peer-to-peer, which are basically a landlord and tenant transaction, right? For the $4,000 per month transaction, you are using Craigslist, which is a tremendously, when you think about it, it just doesn't make sense. There is no reputation system, there is no previous history, there is no track record, but we are using it. So
maybe just don't buy a car.
Yeah, I don't know what your previous experience.
No, there is just a recent case. We don't need to get into it. Okay, Lauren, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I would just stress the importance of sort of the question itself, that there's a very big difference between what users perceive of as safe and what actually will make them safe. And I think like this is really important big picture as we think about the sharing economy, that we don't overwhelm with security theater, and actually have some good data based on where can you get the best results to actually make people safe. And there's this sort of weird new TV show called Adams Knows Everything that was on last night, and I knew somebody who was on it. But they had an episode last night that actually dealt with security theater, and they were talking about taking your shoes off at airports, or signing a credit card receipt, and the differences between those things and things that actually would make us safe. So I think it's really cool that you separated the question in that way.
Awesome. All right. Don. So with 12 million, it's 12 million now, right? Approximately. Global members, how does Couchsurfing approach trust and safety? And as a follow-up to that, do you think as a company scales or as a community scales, trust is scalable?
So we approach trust and safety, I think like most companies do, starting with what tools do we need to have on the platform, both for our members. Let's start with front-end tools, a review system, a reputation system, a messaging system, payment system if you need one, and a reporting system. So the flows, they can report quickly and accurately, and we can get what we need. Starting there, that's kind of your baseline, and we leverage a lot of that, and that's what makes members feel safe, to get back to your point. From there, really, we'll go with education and try to educate people as contextually as we can and as much as we can without trying to overwhelm them with things that aren't necessary, right? Because you want them to be safe, but you don't want them to not feel safe, when in reality, most transactions are highly safe. So working through how and where you educate, I would say, is number 2. From there, it's really your back-end system. So being able to identify risks at sort of a systematic level, people that come back after you've removed them from the site, different behaviors that you can detect on the back end, and when and how to bubble those up so somebody looks at them or automate them out, which helps with scaling, obviously. And then for a response, like what do you do about it, and how quickly can you react if something goes wrong, and making sure all of your processes are buttoned up and you've got a process for when this goes wrong, here, because we can have an issue at any part of the world at any time of day, and it gets complicated. So making sure you've got all of that buttoned up. Part 2 of the question, is it scalable?
Yeah.
I would say yes. I mean, I think it's obviously scalable. If you go back to companies like eBay, obviously they've got hundreds of millions of members. They have a robust trust system. These things are scalable. It's just that as you grow, you start to make trade-offs around accuracy and what you can really look at and how deep you can go and how much attention you can pay, and you get a little bit more blunt on some of those things. I think where it gets tricky in scale is less with the quantity and more with the globalization, because your systems, like payment systems and logistics and background checks and ID verification, they start to become, I would say, inconsistent at best when you start going into emerging markets, if they're even there at all. And I think you could probably speak to whether or not they're there at all. So I would say it's scalable, but it does get tricky when you leave the more developed markets.
Interesting. Can we go back to part 1 of that question? Like, what specifically does Couchsurfing do to create a safe environment? I mean, I know that there's references and there's flagging and there's verification. Like, what would you say are the top features that...
So, I mean, our reference system is probably number 1, because the primary way how somebody will behave within the context of your own service is how they behaved in the past with that service. So if you've got plenty of good references for somebody that has hosted a lot of surfers, you can pretty much read through them and bank on that being okay. Where it gets a little tricky is when you have nothing and you've got someone new on the platform, and you don't necessarily see anything until something goes wrong. So those are the ones we try to pay attention to, and you can spot things in through looking at keywords and messages and messaging patterns, in profile patterns. We get a lot of reports based on messages that are suspicious, reviewing all of those, making sure you've got the right level of education out there so that before somebody decides to go halfway around the world and stay with someone they haven't met, they've asked the right questions, they have a backup plan if something goes wrong, they know kind of who's in the place, what the place looks like, all of those sorts of things to try to keep them safe when they get there.
So this question's for you, Juan. What is the intersection between privacy and reputation? And are there more benefits to having public profiles indexed and viewable than there are drawbacks?
Thank you, Chelsea. This is my favorite question. I get this all the time.
Okay.
So, when we have been working at Trady all this time, we actually we started thinking that Trady had to be a public profile so that people could see you and have an idea of who you were, etc. Over time, we have developed this idea into thinking more about how the offline world works, and let me give you an example for that. So let's say that you go to a shop and you ask for some alcohol. The shop doesn't care about whether you studied in Berkeley. They only care about whether you are 21, and you're only going to show any card that proves that you are 21. Now, let's say that you want to go to the airport and you go to the VIP lounge, and there they don't care if you are 21. They also don't care if you went to Berkeley. They care about whether you have the Star Alliance card that lets you go into the VIP lounge, right? So you have different reputation elements that help you access different opportunities or different services. And the way we are approaching Trady is not that anyone could have access to what you do, but that you should be able to show whatever you want to show to have certain access to certain opportunities. And opportunities is not just marketplaces, which is the most obvious approach. It can be insurance services, it can be credit services, it can be any kind of opportunities that come from the idea of reputation. Default rates are very connected to reputation. Fraudulent claims are very connected to reputation. How would the world look like if you could use your Airbnb or your eBay scores for reducing your house insurance, right? And that's a conversation we're actively having these days with insurance companies about using that, as I mentioned earlier, right? That semantic analysis about how you treat other people's homes. Well, maybe that should affect your house insurance, right? So I think that the world is going to go more into proactively using your reputation for things that matter to you. And this is, I think, it's a very important matter, precisely, particularly today with all the problems we are seeing in terms of data and data breakage, etc. Let's say that the Facebooks and Googles of this world are monetizing your identity, and a service like what we're trying to do is the opposite. It's about you proactively monetizing your own identity. I proactively will give access to my reputational data to get a better loan interest rate. So it's about you using your data in the way you want. And I think that actually connects very well the idea of privacy and transparency. You're being transparent. You're 21, or you have the Star Alliance VIP lounge, but you show it when you want.
So I guess it's very contextual according to the transaction.
And it depends on the opportunities that you want to reach.
A score of some sort for insurance purposes? Is that what you're
I guess a score is the ultimate. Obviously, everything eventually becomes a number, right? Especially when you're looking at risk premiums, etc. But it can become more. It can be richer than that. It can be more than a number. The discussions we're having with this type of companies are more around, as I said, maybe semantic analysis. It's not really about creating a score. It's about getting access to opportunities. There are a few, for example, in emerging economies, you can imagine that in a country like India, there are 600 million people with Facebook identities, and only 200 million people have financial identities. So if you assume that every person had a financial identity, you have 400 million people with social identities who don't have access to the financial markets. How do you help those people access the opportunities? Of course, it's eventually a number, but it's more than that. It's about accessing when you have nothing else that proves your track record. So
showing your relationships, maybe even.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how, if you think about it, that's how Mohammed Yunus in Bangladesh used to give loans to people, or to women in particular. He would give a micro loan to a woman, and how's the name, the backing for that loan was the network. I have 30 people who I have been in this city or in this town for the last 30 years, and they are my, I don't have the name in. They are my collateral, exactly. They are my collateral, and the reason why I have such a tremendous peer pressure to return this microloan is because if I don't return it, then they're going to hate me because the interest rate is going to increase for all of them. So the mesh of the network has a much stronger peer pressure than my own reputation. It's the reputation of the network. So you are going not only from thinking about one person as a reputation, it's much bigger than that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, I mean, that's great. I mean, I'm just thinking about the implications of that. Sorry, guys. I hope that didn't sound sarcastic. I really meant it. It's interesting. So up next, from Max, what happens when someone is denied participation in a marketplace based on a background check? Do they have legal options, legal rights?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it depends on which side of the coin we're talking about. If we're talking about, someone who is a contractor, so again, I'll give the Uber example. If someone is denied entry into that marketplace because of their background check, the Fair Credit Reporting Act has a whole set of guidelines that need to be followed by the organization that is making that determination. So they need to be able to review a copy of their background check. If they want to dispute certain information within that check, then the background checking organization then has to go back to the courthouses. So there's a whole formal process that's that is laid out by law. And then on the other side, if it's, for instance, if someone was not allowed to become a member of Airbnb, that's a little bit different. And so there's less in terms of strict written law there, but then it becomes more of a set of guidelines. And so what does that organization want to set out as? We have set these standards, and if you don't abide by these standards with regards to your criminal history, then you may not be able to participate in our market. And so,
is that legal though? I mean, can they do that? It depends.
It depends on their user agreement, right? And so it's again, there's
and
two
employment
sides.
laws too, yeah.
So you're not, if you're trying to join Airbnb, for instance, if you want to rent a home, you're not being employed by Airbnb. You're not a contractor. If you want to drive for Uber, you are a contractor of Uber, or maybe an employee, depending on the.
That's in flux.
Right. So again, it's two sides of the coin. So if you're being hired, there's several laws that protect you as an employer or contractor. But that landscape is a little fuzzier when it comes to participation.
And as a follow-up to that question, what are the differences? Are there differences between different background check companies, or? I teed you up for that one.
Yeah, well.
But I think it's an important thing to discuss because I think that they are different.
Yeah, and so you could, at the end of the day, the actual public records, the criminal records out there, they're not going to differ too much between background checking companies. There's only so many court records out there. It's a matter of, one, how quickly can you go and access those records? Is the source that you're getting them from a legitimate source, has been verified? And then, so the speed, and then actually what do you do with those records when they come back? How do you handle this process that we were just talking about, which is referred to as the adverse action process? When someone has a problem with their background check because information came back, maybe the record didn't belong to them, how does that company remediate that issue? And then it's philosophically, how do you integrate with services? How easy can you make it for companies to allow individuals to quickly run their background check from within an app, for instance? And so there's a number of differences.
And it's also like scalability too, like as you need more stuff, right? Like
absolutely.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about this. What plans do you have so that people can manage their own reputation and have it be portable? What plans do you have so that people can manage their own reputation and have it be portable and secure and have some ownership over it?
Right. So I mean, obviously that was the main objective of Trady from the beginning. There are a few things we are doing right now. In terms of security that you mentioned, now everything, for example, that happens on Trady is already happening on blockchain, on Bitcoin's blockchain. So every single reputation score that you gather from Airbnb and that you are recording on Trady is now being recorded on the blockchain. The reason why this is important is because if Trady eventually disappears, which could happen any day, you still own your data, you still own your reputation. It also means that our game is not about selling people's data because the data is on the blockchain. So that's not our game. And so that's kind of the message we want to give with that. In terms of the plans, our vision for the future, it might be us or maybe somebody else, is something like Trady Connect. If you think about Facebook Connect, Facebook is a very centralized identity where you are only allowed to extract data from Facebook. You are allowed to extract the friends or the age or the name, things like that. Trady is more dynamic from the point of view that it allows marketplaces or different reputation sources to put data into Trady, and then whoever uses that Trady Connect button to extract data from Trady, right? So it's kind of the way that identities can build over time and be more dynamically driven by the user to extract data from that. So that's kind of our vision for the future. It might be us or it might be somebody else. And when I speak about this, obviously Trady has the branding power that it has, right? And it's limited. Could somebody else execute on this? I think so. Could eBay have executed on this? Absolutely. They could have had the same way that we do Facebook Connect. they could have done eBay Connect, and maybe we would be using eBay Connect for our Airbnb and for our Uber and for everything, right? And it's like, why? Because eBay has my reputation. It just makes so much sense. But they didn't. So now somebody else has to do it.
This is one of the things I'm most curious about personally. When there's a platform safety incident, say on Uber or Airbnb, are the platforms themselves legally responsible for something that goes wrong or if someone gets taken advantage of or hurt?
Well, it depends. Yeah, this is, I can't give you an answer for every crowd, every type of platform in the sharing economy. I think that, and the truth is that there's a lot of law out there that applies to, accidents or, how much responsibility a person has for the sidewalk of their home when a stranger trips over it, let alone safety in their home when they rent it out. So I think there's a lot here of sort of basic, laws that apply. There's some limitations that companies can put on their liability by, doing really good terms of service. And by that, I don't mean like fine print terms of service, but like cross-platform messaging of what the risks are. I think the more that you sort of disclose the risks, the better off you are. And I think this is sometimes a challenge because a company doesn't want to advertise all their risks. But it's like when you go to park your car in the garage and they say, if you leave your car, don't leave things visible. I mean, they're doing that for a reason. So I think that there's some give and take there. I think like, I tend to think that, sometimes the legal liability is the cheapest part of any sort of security incident. So, if you're, I'll take Airbnb since they didn't show up. If you're Airbnb, if you're Airbnb and suddenly there's a bunch of stories about people getting, raped or robbed or whatever in houses, you don't have a business anymore. So I think that there's legal liability is sort of a complicated issue, but I think it's more important to sort of think about the big picture. Trust and safety is a brand question, and that's why I go back to why it's so important to figure out like how you can provide actual safety and how you can provide the perception of good safety, because most of the time it's very sort of mission critical to your company. I will say, like, I've been doing these issues in privacy since the mid 90s. Like it's these are issues that we've that people have been thinking about and talking about for a long time, like the relationship between how much data you should disclose in order to get reputation, and so these are, so I just wanted to get say that like there is no like good metric, or like nobody's actually really solved that, and part of the problem is like sometimes what gives you reputation in one context is not going to give you good reputation in another context. And so I think that these are really complicated questions, and there's my answer that really didn't give you anything specific. So going back to the question, there are lots of ways that you can limit your liability, and you may well be liable if you didn't take reasonable precautions. But it's going to be.
What is a reasonable precaution?
Oh, what is a reasonable precaution? Well, steps that like a reasonable business would take. So I guess a reasonable precaution, like one easy way, a reasonable precaution is something that all your competitors are doing, right? So, I mean, like if all your competitors are doing something and you're not, you should worry about that. I mean, it is a case by case analysis. Like, in every case when somebody's injured, they're going to argue the company should have taken better steps to keep me safe, such as, and then what are those steps? So I'm not a proponent of taking like every step possible, but you can look at I'll pick on another Shuttle, which is a company I've looked at because I have small children that need to be carpooled all over the place, and I work a lot of hours. So, so you can look to see like what kind of precautions a company like that takes in terms of, for example, they interview everybody that they. I don't work for any company that I'm talking about. They interview people that they hire. Well, Uber doesn't do that because there's a perception for your children you would want more. So I think their position would be maybe the level of security that an Uber has is not reasonable when you're ferrying around children. So you really have to sort of have a really good brainstorming session about like what are all the kinds of things that we can do, and then what is a reasonable grouping of these that would make my users actually safe, and then have the conversation of what we could do to create the perception that they're safe.
So I'd love some closing thoughts from everybody on trust and safety, if you have anything additional to say, and then also what you think is next. Like, what do you think we'll see next in terms of profiles, background checks, reputation, anything really? And then we'll turn it back to you guys, the audience, because I know you guys have questions and there's a lot of knowledge in the room. So I'm excited to participate both ways. So we'll start with you, Juan.
Okay, so closing thoughts for small marketplaces, and we work with many marketplaces. What we learned that works best is do very significant checks of the first users, because as the network increases in size, you will automate it more. But we found that the most successful marketplaces started interviewing every single user. It's very automated. It's very manual. It doesn't even use Trady at all. I mean, I'm just really giving a very general thought or learning about what we have discussed with hundreds of marketplaces. And the most successful ones interview all their users at the beginning, especially people like babysitters, dog sitters, etc. They all interview their users. Over time, you can take more and more risk. And today, a larger network like Airbnb is less likely to go through that process, more likely to rely on algorithms. But I think that's more of a risk-benefit kind of graph that you have to assess. Thoughts for the future. I think that the largest challenges that we will have in the future are not technical, they are mostly ethical. Technically, measuring reputation or measuring trust, I think it can be solved. Ethically, we have to discuss things such as should we be able to delete our negative reputation from the past, or maybe have a sliding window for the last 4 years, for example. Should we have curation like Uber does, or should we have reputation? What do we choose? Should the algorithms control or allow us to decide who we interact with or transact with, right? So I think that those are some of the challenges that we have to think about very carefully, and most of them are ethical. They are not technical. And I think that today each of the marketplaces are making their own decisions about what is best. We'll see if something emerges as a standard of how things should look like that are hopefully good for society as overall.
So closing thoughts, I don't know, something Lauren said actually hit me when she said she's been doing this since the 90s and there are no real answers. I mean, I kind of feel that way about trust and safety, and that, there are a lot of companies, we actually all talk and try to share best practices. How do you solve this? How do you solve that? And no one really has an answer. I mean, I've talked to companies that I think do trust and safety far better than companies I've worked for. And they come to us for help and vice versa, right? And so we're all trying to solve these same questions. And I think if we knew what was next, we'd be building it, which is why, there's always, you try to manage it. You're never going to really get rid of it. And so really it's about managing it as best you can and eliminating the safety issues, and then accepting your tolerance for like the trust related stuff and the risk branding and whatnot. But seriously, as far as what's next, I do think Here to my left is one thing. We had been talking about a portable reputation at eBay over a decade ago. That never happened. And I think new ways of looking at reputations. And I'm looking at personal heroes over here too, who is creating kind of a positive reputation app. I don't want to sell you short, but and Traity building a portable reputation for everything. I think eventually a globalized reputation will stick. And how and where it's used is TBD, but I definitely think that's something coming.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a combination of things. It's going to be a combination of your reputation. It's going to be a combination of public records, and there's no real magic bullet that says, okay, once we have these things lined up, suddenly we have an infinite amount of trust and safety. And so it's going to continue to evolve over time, as it has since the 90s and probably before that too. I think it's good to have conversations like this, to help people become aware of what's going on, maybe behind the scenes. They don't realize all the steps that Couchsurfing is taking, and some of these other companies. And the more that we can make it transparent, what's being done, and continue to look for ways to refine the processes that are used, and the data we find, and how it all gets aggregated together. I think the closer we'll get to that paradigm of, yes, we found ultimate safety, but I think we're probably a little ways off from that.
Yeah, I guess my final point would be, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, recently had an event about, the sharing economy. I think it's a question that's like not just a, technical question, a user question. It's a societal question of how and when people get to participate, and under what circumstances. And I think it's really sort of paving the ground for what a lot of employment or transportation or visiting a different foreign place is going to look like in the future. I know I spent a lot of time thinking about this with Inflection, but these sort of bigger picture questions are really, really important, and I think it's great to have events like this where we can think about it, and that you guys all can go back to your companies or wherever your friends, and think about the social issues involved.
So I'm really excited to turn it back to you guys in the audience. I know we have people from Upwork, TaskRabbit, Indiegogo, and a number of other companies here. So I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are, as well as your questions. So we'll start here, since you're right in front of me.
This is addressed to Don, but anybody else who wants to chime in. Don, before you mentioned that you are currently doing things to identify risks at the back end, and I was wondering if you could give some examples of that. And I was also wondering if you're using, deep learning, that's like the big thing now, right, to identify these patterns without necessarily specifying them in advance.
So I can't get too deep into exactly what we do. I will say it's not as advanced or elegant as it probably could be. We did some very very deep analytics and a lot of processing at eBay, and I'm sure they still do, to root out these things and exactly where you're going. And we had algorithms to detect virtually everything across the board. Couchsurfing, much more limited, much smaller. They're more like, we've got a lot of triggers in place, more than deep learning algorithms. Can't go really too deep into what they are, but it's essentially you know where people are going on the site, what they're doing, how often they're doing things, and you've got the content of everything they're doing. Once you identify patterns of behavior that are suspicious, you can plug it in and search for it, which is at a high level what we do.
Okay, I also have a question for Don. I'm Vidya, and I had a question since I used Couchsurfing about like 4 or 5 years ago, and I got hit up for threesomes all over Prague. And I was wondering, some people might be into that, some people aren't into that at all. So how do you actually, I'm just for record not into it, but no disrespect to anyone who is. But how do you say, I'm not interested in this, but it's not necessarily like bad action?
So the first part is...
Oh, good. Sex.
No, the first part is that's not allowed. And so if it comes to us, we take action. But you have a separate part of your question, which is how do you separate what was a bad action from it's basically having the right tools for the right reporting system, right? So not every violation of every policy requires a full deactivation of somebody's account. And one of the things we're actually working on is sort of building out some of those so you can get a little more nuanced on the actions you take on a member and let them know outside of maybe an email that something isn't permitted and get their attention. Unfortunately, again, I can't go too deep there, but there are certainly ways, and it's essentially just having the right consequence for the right violation at the right step in the flow. How many times have they violated, what is your policy, and what's the action you take, and just building that out.
I guess I'm branded pretty well. I am wearing my Indiegogo stuff. It's a question more for Lauren. My name's Justin. I work in trust and safety at Indiegogo. We're in the nature of crowdfunding, where people run campaigns on our site to fund causes, ideas, anything like that.
I'm familiar.
All right, and just in case, and one of the common issues that we face is oftentimes things don't go to plan. People have a great idea and funds are being used, but ultimately things don't pan out. And my question is, first, I guess from a legal perspective, do you think, or are campaign owners even in the first place, should they get, I guess, to use a business term, like limited liability for when it comes to accepting funds from the crowd? And if things don't work out, should they be held responsible? Sometimes the news we've heard about, I think it was attorney generals in different states saying that campaign owners can be held responsible for not delivering on their promises. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Right. So it's a very specific legal question, so I'm not giving you, don't take any of this as legal advice. So the way I would advise a company in this area, not you, is that you want to set up like your expectation super early with both your person creating the campaign and the campaigners for what your position is with regard to a campaign that doesn't work. And this is where, I think companies can make mistakes, like they want to hide it in the fine print because they don't want to be like, yeah, this might not happen, but give your money anyway, right? It's not good messaging. But so like the best way would be to just be particularly clear. I think part of the problem why this has come up at the, like why higher policy people have stepped in is because a lot of this isn't clear to, somebody who signed up. They didn't really understand what their responsibility, So I think that if I was, I thought about these issues at Stanford Law School for many years, and if I was choosing a structure, I'd want to have a structure that says, like banks do, like they insure against anything, or credit card companies, or like you'll cover all costs because you want to get more and more people to use your product. So I would, from a business perspective, that's what I would want to do, which is to try to get more people. But I don't know the particular costs involved and stuff like that. I don't know if that was helpful, but that's how I would think about the question internally. I would say, like, what do you want to do? If you don't want to be responsible at all, you can totally write off that responsibility. And if you do it clearly, then I don't think you're going to have any problem. But if you don't do it clearly, I think there's going to be questions in people's minds. And all of you, I assume, because you're here, you're in a new space. There's not a lot of people who've done this before that you can, there's not a lot of case law out there. I can't read a case necessarily on like all the questions that I get asked every day and find out the correct answer. So,
hi, I'm Tiffany. So I was just curious, how can we as participants and advocates of the sharing economy be proactive and further the dialogue around trust and safety to be able to mold and uphold a standard for these marketplaces?
What we have seen happening is with many marketplaces, the users are asking the marketplaces to put the right systems in place to be safe. Now, I think that what we need to define better as an industry is what are the right systems. Obviously, I could argue that they are the treaty systems, and Good Hire could argue that they are the Good Hire systems, right? And that every marketplace should have a background check. I don't think that's the right answer, but I also don't think that the right answer would be that the FTC would come and say all the marketplaces should apply this. But there are probably a few good practices that it could look just like e-commerce, right? In e-commerce, you have either the trustee certification or a few certifications that could argue, well, we have this level of certification because we use Good Hire background checks, or we use some other type of background checks, but both of them give me this type of certification. I think that that type of standardization will eventually happen. I don't think it will be led by government, mostly because marketplaces are very global, all of them. I mean, almost any transaction happens, or many transactions happen across countries. It will be very difficult to control that internationally. I think it will happen more in a local environment and simply as an agreement between certain players. Who are those players? Probably the larger players. Probably the likes of, the big players will probably come together and say, it would be nice if we had these check boxes of trust. And I think it will be led by the users. The users are already asking for it because we get those requests all the time. Hey, why don't you integrate with these guys? Well, it depends on them, right? So we are getting that type of feedback.
Add one quick thing. There's also likely going to be some government involvement, and we're already seeing a lot of bills in state legislatures that are trying to force, for instance, fingerprinting on all drivers to adhere to the same standards that taxi drivers have to go through. And so I think it's going to be a combination of likely the major players in the space coming together and setting standards, but also the government is probably going to step in and try to help set standards because issues have arisen, and so and that's what the government's job is, to help keep us safe too.
My question is, how do you sort of encourage your community to give a more granular response as to whether this certain individual or the other was more trustworthy?
Funny you should mention, we've got a little piece of content and, kind of explaining within the flow the type of content we're looking for that not helps us, but helps other members. But outside of that, I actually think your reputation system as a whole, that's exactly what it's meant to do. So sure, you've got a negative and a positive, but within that, what your reputation system really brings you is beyond just the context of being on your site and how people act on your site. It brings you the differentiation of, it was a positive experience, he gave me his couch, he went to bed and left me alone and I left, and it was fine, right? Free couch. Versus we went out of the town, he showed me all the great sites, et cetera, et cetera. Now, from a positive, negative, neutral perspective, that's the same. They're both positive. But to you, looking to go to one of those people's houses, you get that granularity. And so, to me, I think encouraging it and educating on what kind of content you want in that system is important. But I actually haven't found that to be a huge problem. Usually the content within the reputation system drives that differentiation. And you can look at sites that have things beyond positive, negative, neutral that have additional variables. We don't at this point, but you can look at things like star ratings and Amazon's got them for different aspects, eBay's got them for different aspects, all sorts, most sites do. So I guess I'd land there. I think within the content itself, number one, and B, if you want to go more granular, you can always implement sort of a subset section.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm the founder of Kovo, a co-working company with a bar. I am wondering, is there kind of a like cloud.com or any sort of standard that has rankings of trust and stability and safety of these companies? Because I know we put so much trust into the Uber when we get into the car, and yes, Uber has insurance, but that's to protect Uber, and the driver has insurance to protect the driver, and you kind of, and like there's so many, and Airbnb has insurance and takes a certain amount of liability, but it's really on the user. And I wish they were here because I'm really curious about how it affects Prop F, and I wanted them to defend themselves, but that's okay. But is there anywhere that kind of, not from the perspective of, oh, we have to fix our reputation or we're going to lose all of our clients, but we actually want to do it the right way from the beginning?
I mean, I just wanted to say in response to that, I think an idea of like shares insurance, say like if I want to share my home or my car, is an excellent idea, which is something maybe they are alluding to. But like I'll let the panel respond to your actual question.
I wouldn't say there's a set standard, but we have a lot of conversations with these types of companies about how they can set their standards, and particularly as it relates to their use of public records. So whether it's background checks and the like, and so it's evolving like everything else here, and so I think it's through experience with working with many different companies in this space that we're able to get some kind of key learnings and best practices, and that's what we try to pass on to companies and be a partner in helping them think through how they want to set those standards for themselves based on kind of the situation they're in and the types of transactions they're having.
Yeah, it's so context dependent, right? Like a background check is a very good tool for some businesses, and it, not for like Reddit or Slashdot, So I think that I think any sort of I just don't think like it's realistic to think that you could do anything but a context dependent, like has this company taken like sort of reasonable precautions that are appropriate to the level of risk in the business. And so you might be able to compare between Lyft and Uber, but I don't think you can really compare between Indiegogo and Airbnb and other companies. I think some of this burden is actually, sort of on the consumers too, how much risk they're willing to take. And right now, there aren't that many horror stories out there. So I think which has been great for the industry. And I will say over time, this is how the law develops. So somebody didn't take a certain precaution, and then it becomes like a problem. And so now it becomes the industry standard to take a certain precaution. So that's why, again, I would say you should, looking at amongst your competitors, what kinds of things are they doing? Using it, obviously, trust and safety as a competitive advantage, I think is really good. But at minimum, meeting the reasonable requirements within the business.
All right, so we have time for 2 more questions. In the back.
My personal story is after 6 years of being on the investment side of tech, I'm really interested and passionate and committed to sort of exploring something in trust and safety. Question is for anyone on the panel. I was just curious sort of what your personal relationship was with this space, sort of if you stumbled upon it or were sort of purposeful about being in trust and safety, which I think is like an evolving and new space. So just curious sort of if there were any specific motivations or things that drew you to the career that you guys have now.
I was looking to rent an apartment in San Francisco, and my roommate was out of the country, and I had to go to showings and present our information and try to rent an apartment. And one place we presented an application, and it came back that it was rejected. And I was very surprised because both of us had great credit, we had good jobs. I thought we'd be fine. And I kind of probed the owner, and he said, well, your roommate didn't pass his background check. I said, oh, that's odd. Can you give me some more information? And after some back and forth, he said, well, your roommate is a registered sex offender. And so that was news to me. And so going back and forth, I found out that the service he used was just a very poor service, and I actually looked up my roommate's name on the National Sex Offender Registry list, and there's a picture of a guy, and it was not my roommate, and different date of birth and all that. So, for me, I found that it's an important part of a lot of elements of our lives. Renting an apartment, finding a job. There's so many parts of our lives that these types of things touch, and so for me, that's kind of my entrance into trust and safety and being more interested in what happened behind the scenes.
I would say I absolutely fell into it, no intention whatsoever, but I've never wanted to leave. Like, I love it, and I've realized it is what I want to continue to do. And when I was interested in other roles, I never looked at anything outside of trust and safety. It's I don't know, you get to see how things evolve and how your community evolves, and I don't know, you can really feel like you're doing good work. You're building out interesting things at the same time. You're helping people and helping a community grow and feel safe. It's great.
So our story is that I actually got scammed when I was living in the UK on a website called Gumtree, which is similar to Craigslist for the UK. I got scammed £250 of a second-hand laptop that was supposed to come to my home, and it's funny because I called the guy, we spoke on the phone, I took all the, I don't know, it was not like I just did email. Eventually, obviously the laptop didn't arrive. I checked I followed his email address through the internet, and I found that guy had scammed another 5 people. So I found a way to find his bank account in Nottingham, and I went to the police and I took him to court. And I didn't do it for myself. I was wasting my time, but it was more for him not to do it again. And I never got my money back because the guy was 17, and so it was quite annoying. But that was kind of wow. That didn't work then. And then when a couple of months later, I was talking to who's today my co-founder, one of my best friends, who had built an algorithm to measure the reputation of football players, of amateur football players. He used to go to play football with his friends, and he wanted to find people of his same level, so people who were not too good and not too bad, because you get bored with both. So when you're not at the right level, so I said, hey, this algorithm could be used for something like So and it eventually took to the sharing economy, and he became my co-founder, and we started the company.
Well, I would talk. I'm spend a lot of time thinking about privacy and reputation, privacy issues. I'm like sort of the person that deletes their cookies, and I'm really sort of interested in this question. I think that how do you create, how do we as a society think about the right of people to sort of, let their past be behind them and move on, which I think is important, but also the utility of things like public records in order to help make communities more safe. So, it's really fun to work with. Inflection is really thinking about this, and it's I'm like, I did stupid things when I was a kid, surprise. And, but and I think it's really interesting to think about, what is it like to be a kid these days where, your lives, it's harder to escape those things, and how do we as a society balance the availability of records and the benefits with, sometimes we need to be, we don't need to look at that. It's when should we look at that and when shouldn't we? So I think it's fascinating, really interesting, great place to have your career.